Iran's Revolutionary Guard today released footage of their operation to intercept the UK-flagged tanker, the Stena Impero. The helicopter hovers overhead. There are shots of the guards inside, readying to go through the hatch. Then one by one they climb down the rope to take control of the vessel, which they claim was in breach of international maritime law. Small craft follow the ship as it veers off course and heads for Iranian waters. Today, the Foreign Secretary spoke to his Iranian counterpart and said on Monday further security measures for shipping would be announced.
This is totally and utterly unacceptable. It raises very serious questions about the security of British shipping and indeed international shipping in the Straits of Hormuz. And so we spent a long time this afternoon in Cobra discussing how we can guarantee the security of British and international shipping.
The port of Bandar Abbas, where the Stena Impero is being held, is the Iranian Navy's main base. The British say the ship was seized in Omani waters while heading for Saudi Arabia. 1/3 of the world's seaborne oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, which is a diplomatic front line with Gulf Arab states on one side and Iran on the other. British-flagged vessels are now likely to be escorted in convoys by a warship, but Britannia no longer rules the waves.
I mean, I actually believe we should have 4 ships out there. The problem is this highlights the deplorable state we're in, where successive governments have cut our surface ships to a ridiculous extent, bearing in mind the responsibilities we have. We run global shipping from London. We have 14 dependencies worldwide. We're a permanent member of the Security Council. And yet here we are, this great maritime nation, with 1 warship, effectively a large warship, in the Persian Gulf. It's a dreadful state to be in.
The Dolphins are free to move. The Iranian ship, the Grey Swan, behind them is not. It's being held in Gibraltar, suspected of transporting oil in breach of sanctions to Syria. The seizure of the British-flagged tanker was retaliation.
Our priority continues to be to find a way to de-escalate the situation. That's why I reached out to the Iranian foreign minister. That's why due process in Gibraltar continues. But we need to see due process happening in Iran as well. We need to see the illegal seizing of a British-flagged vessel reversed. We need that ship released.
The 23 crew members of the Stena Impero are effectively hostages, as tension between America and Iran swells and Britain finds itself caught in the turbulent wake.
Lindsay Hilson reporting there. Well, joining me now is the shipping analyst Michelle V.C. Bockman. Michelle, explain why the seizure of this ship is so serious.
Well, this is the biggest thing to happen in this region in terms of a threat to security and safety since the Iraq wars in 2003. And it also has one of the world's top shipping countries, that's the United Kingdom, unable to have its vessels going in the area because it's too dangerous for them. And that's something that's also very, very unusual, coming on the back, of course, of 2 months of ramping up of tensions between Iran, the US and the Middle East allies it has, as well as the UK now.
And we heard the Foreign Secretary today say Britain's shipping must and will be protected. But how can that be done? Can that be done?
Well, it's very tricky to find a diplomatic solution to this that doesn't imperil some sort of the threat to safety in the region. I mean, you risk, if you increase naval assets in the region, of further inflaming the situation. But it's quite clear from Iran's stated intentions that it intends to retaliate against the UK for the seizure of the Grace 1. And I think until that is resolved, there won't be some resolution for shipping for the UK here in the Middle East.
And that won't necessarily be resolved for some time.
Well, that's the problem. It's not necessarily straightforward. The sweeping powers that Gibraltar gave itself in order to seize the vessel mean that there are possibilities that the US is able to take civil action to have the vessel forfeited. So there's a possibility of protracted legal action to be dragged out in the Gibraltar courts. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it can be a direct swap.
And meanwhile, this idea of protecting British seafarers and British ships, one of the ideas being put forward is this idea of some sort of naval convoy. Do you see that working? Do you see that inflaming the situation potentially?
Well, I think the industry is now coalescing behind some plan that is loosely modelled on what happened a decade ago to fight Somali piracy. And that was some sort of transit system that wasn't necessarily a military convoy, but it brought together all the vessels at a particular time so they would sail together, and the limited assets that they had were nearby if there was any threat. But that said, I think the safest way for global trade to continue in short term will be to choose vessels that are, say, Chinese flagged, where there's clearly more friendly relations with Iran.
I mean, the Iranian foreign minister made it clear in a tweet that it's Iran which guarantees the security of the Persian Gulf. What do you read into that?
Well, I think international maritime law is quite clear about how the Strait of Hormuz is managed. And I think the footage that we saw is not your ordinary way of dealing with, any violation of international maritime law.
And aside from the potential dangers, there's a huge financial cost to this waterway being kept open and fluid.
Well, 16.8 million barrels per day of crude flows through. If you add refined products like diesel, jet fuel, gas oil, gasoline, that's more like 20 million barrels per day. About 3/4 of it heads to Asia. And so there is no other way for these energy commodities to leave. So it is imperative that it stays open and that ships continue to get through. There's maybe about 30 tankers daily go through there.